Welcome back to another story on Infidelity Tales Lab. Before we begin, tell us, where in the world are you watching from? Now, let's dive into today's story. Chapter 1. The Quiet Life. Jack Beck wiped the grease from his hands, staring at the disassembled motorcycle engine spread across his garage workbench. 38 years old, 6'2", with the kind of lean muscle that came from discipline rather than vanity, he'd spent the last decade trying to build something that resembled normal. The scar tissue running along his left forearm, courtesy of a roadside bomb in Kandahar, served as a permanent reminder that normal was a luxury he'd earned the hard way. Dad, you in there?" His son's voice cut through the silence. 8-year-old Kurt had his mother's dark hair and his father's gray eyes that had seen too much for someone who still believed in Santa Claus. "In the garage, buddy," Jack called back, setting down his wrench. Kurt appeared in the doorway, backpack slung over one shoulder, but something was off. The kid's usual boundless energy was gone, replaced by something Jack recognized from his years in military intelligence. Fear poorly masked his calm. "How was school?" Jack asked, studying his son's face. "Fine." The word came too quickly. Kurt glanced over his shoulder toward the house. Through the garage's side window, Jack could see his wife Rosie's car in the driveway. She was home early. Jack had met Rosie Dunn 10 years ago at a veteran support group. She'd been a volunteer, warm and patient with broken soldiers trying to piece themselves back together. They'd married within a year. For a while, it had been good. She'd given him Kurt, given him a reason to wake up without reaching for the bottle. But the last 18 months had opened cracks in the foundation. Late nights at her book club, hushed phone calls, a new distance in her eyes. "You sure everything's okay?" Jack crouched down to his son's level. Kurt bit his lip, a habit he'd picked up from Rosie. Can we talk? Just us." Jack's instincts sharpened. He'd learned to read people in places where the wrong assessment could cost lives. His son was terrified. "Let's take a walk," Jack said, standing. He called toward the house. "Rosie," taking Kurt to the park for a bit. A muffled acknowledgement came from inside. They didn't wait for more. The park was 3 blocks away, a modest stretch of grass with aging playground equipment. Jack led Kurt to a bench far from the handful of other parents supervising their kids. The afternoon sun cast long shadows, and for a moment, neither of them spoke. "Dad," Kurt finally said, his voice barely above a whisper. "Promise you'll stay calm." Every alarm bell in Jack's mind started ringing. Those were the words people used before delivering devastating news. He'd heard them in briefings before learning about casualties, before receiving divorce papers from soldiers whose marriages hadn't survived deployment. "I promise," Jack said, though his jaw was already tightening. "What's going on?" Kurt reached into his backpack with trembling hands. "Mommy's friend, the police officer. He came to my school today. Harvey Moran." Jack's hands clenched involuntarily. Harvey was a detective with the city police, late 40s, divorced, the kind of cop who'd learned to work the system rather than serve it. He'd been coming around for the last 6 months, supposedly because he and Rosie had gone to high school together. Jack had tolerated it because Rosie insisted they were just old friends, but his gut had been screaming otherwise. "He pulled me out of class," Kurt continued. "Said he had something for you. Made me promise." His voice cracked. "Made me promise not to tell Mom. Said it was important, that you needed to see it first." Kurt pulled out a sealed envelope. It was standard letter size, but thick. Jack's name was written across the front in unfamiliar handwriting. Neat, careful, the kind of penmanship that belonged to someone who paid attention to details. "Did Harvey say anything else?" Jack asked, taking the envelope. "He said," Kurt's eyes filled with tears. "He said you'd understand, that you'd know what to do." "Dad, what's happening? Is Mom okay? Are you guys getting divorced?" Jack pulled his son close, feeling the boy's small frame shake against his chest. "Hey, look at me." He tilted Kurt's chin up. "Whatever this is, we'll handle it. You and me." "Okay." Kurt nodded, wiping his eyes with his sleeve. "But I need you to do exactly what Harvey said," Jack continued, keeping his voice steady. "Don't tell your mom about this. Not yet. Can you do that for me?" Another nod. "Good man." Jack ruffled his son's hair, then stood. "Let's get you home. I need to read this." Jack waited until Kurt was inside, safely distracted by video games, before returning to the garage. He locked the door behind him and sat on his workbench stool, studying the envelope under the harsh fluorescent lights. The weight of it was wrong, too heavy for a simple letter. He turned it over, checking for any signs of tampering, then carefully opened it. Inside were 3 items: a handwritten note, a USB drive, and a series of photographs. Jack read the note first. "Beck, you don't know me, but I know what's about to happen to you. My name is Neil Alvarado. I'm Harvey Moran's partner. Or I was until 3 days ago. I'm writing this from a hospital bed. Car accident, they'll say. Brake failure. But I checked those brakes myself the morning it happened. Harvey's dirty. Has been for years. Protection rackets, evidence tampering, the works. I got too close, started asking questions, and now I'm looking at 6 months of physical therapy if I'm lucky. But that's not why I'm writing you. Your wife has been sleeping with Harvey for 8 months. I'm sorry. I know that's not easy to hear. But it's worse than that. They're not just having an affair. They're planning to rob you blind and frame you for something that'll put you away for life. The USB drive has everything I've managed to collect. Bank statements, recorded conversations, Harvey's notes. He's been working with your wife to set up a scheme involving her access to the military veterans fund she manages. They're planning to steal $2.3 million and make it look like you did it. Your military background, your security clearance, your access to her accounts. It's all going to point straight at you. The frame-up goes down in 4 days. They're going to discover the theft, and Harvey will make sure the evidence trail leads to your door. With his badge and your wife's testimony, you won't stand a chance. I couldn't go to internal affairs. Harvey's got too many friends there. I couldn't go to the FBI. By the time they investigate, you'll already be arrested and the damage will be done. So I'm giving you this. What you do with it is your choice. I'd disappear if I were you. Take your kid and run. But if you're the man I think you are, the kind of man who survives Kandahar and comes home to build a life, then maybe you'll want to fight. If you do, be smart. Harvey's dangerous when cornered. And your wife? She's colder than you think. Good luck. Neil Alvarado. Jack read the note 3 times, his expression never changing. Then he looked at the photographs. They showed Rosie and Harvey together, at restaurants, in Harvey's car, entering a motel on the outskirts of town. The timestamps range from 6 months ago to as recent as 2 days ago. The final photo made his blood run cold. Rosie and Harvey standing in what looked like a bank vault, both of them smiling at something off camera. Jack set the photos down carefully and picked up the USB drive. His hand was steady, the same steadiness that had served him during firefights and hostage negotiations. Panic was a luxury for people who had the privilege of falling apart. He learned long ago that survival required clarity. He inserted the USB drive into his laptop and opened the files. What he found over the next hour painted a picture of betrayal so calculated, so thorough, that it almost impressed him from a tactical standpoint. Harvey had been meticulously documenting a fake trail, emails from Jack's computer to offshore accounts, forged signatures, planted evidence in his home office. The plan was brilliant in its simplicity. Use Jack's military intelligence background and his wife's position to create an unshakable narrative of a desperate veteran turned thief. There were audio recordings, too. Jack played one. Harvey's voice. The beauty of it is everyone will believe it. War hero comes home with PTSD, can't adjust to civilian life, sees an opportunity through his wife's work. It writes itself. Rosie's voice, cold and calculated. What about Kurt? Harvey, what about him? He'll go to your sister. You'll play the devastated wife, testify against your husband. After the trial, we wait a year, then suddenly your grief turns into something new. We can be together, and with the money in the Caymans, we can live anywhere we want. Rosie, after a pause, and if Jack figures it out before the frame-up? Harvey, laughing, then we move to plan B, domestic dispute gone wrong. I respond to your 911 call, find him threatening you with a gun. Clean shoot. Either way, he's gone and we get what we want. Jack closed the laptop. His face remained impassive, but his mind was already working through scenarios, calculating angles, planning moves 3 steps ahead. the same skill set that had kept his team alive in hostile territory. For days until they made their move. 4 days to dismantle everything they'd built and ensure they paid for it. He pulled out his phone and dialed a number he hadn't called in 2 years. Merle Lamb, a gruff voice answered. Merle, it's Jack Beck. I need a favor. A big one. There was a pause. Merle had served under Jack in Afghanistan, saved his life during that roadside bomb. They'd kept in touch after discharge, though Merle had gone into a different line of work, private security and investigation for corporate clients. Name it, Merle said simply. I need surveillance equipment, a safe location, and your particular set of skills. And I need it tonight. You in trouble? Not yet, Jack said, looking at the photographs spread across his workbench. But someone's about to be. Chapter 2. The Investigation. Jack Beck spent that night in his garage, the glow of his laptop screen casting sharp shadows across his face. He'd sent Rosie a text claiming he needed to finish an urgent client report, a plausible excuse given his work as a security consultant. She'd responded with a thumbs-up emoji, no questions asked. That alone told him everything about the state of their marriage. By midnight, Merle Lamb arrived in an unmarked van. Merle was built like a bulldog, shorter than Jack but twice as wide, with a shaved head and knuckles scarred from a youth spent boxing in Detroit. He'd traded his military fatigues for expensive suits, but underneath the corporate polish was still the same Marine who dragged Jack from a burning vehicle while taking fire. You look like hell, Merle said, setting down 2 large equipment cases. Feel worse. Jack helped him unload. Thanks for coming. You said someone's trying to frame you for embezzlement. That the short version? That's the generous version. Jack handed him the envelope. Read it, then we'll talk. While Merle absorbed the contents, Jack pulled up the USB files again. He'd spent hours analyzing them, and something had been bothering him, a detail that didn't fit. Jesus, Merle muttered, finishing the note. Your wife and a dirty cop. That's dark even for my line of work. Look at this. Jack pointed to the screen, pulling up a series of bank records. Neil says they're planning to steal $2.3 million from the Veterans Fund. But these backdated transactions? They show preliminary transfers going back 14 months. Rosie only took over as fund manager 10 months ago. Merle leaned in, eyes narrowing. So either Neil's timeline is wrong or someone else is involved. Someone who had access before Rosie. Jack switched to another file, a personnel roster for the Mountain Ridge Veterans Support Foundation where Rosie worked. Her predecessor was a woman named Louise Hughes. She resigned abruptly right before Rosie got the position. No forwarding address, no social media presence since she left. You think she's part of this? I think she's either part of it or she found out and got scared. Jack pulled up a photo of Louise, a severe-looking woman in her 50s with steel gray hair. Either way, we need to find her. Merle cracked his knuckles. I'll have my people on it by morning. What else? Harvey Moran. Jack brought up a police personnel file he'd accessed using credentials from his consulting work. Technically a gray area, but he'd stopped caring about technicalities. 17 years on the force. Decorated. But look at his financials. He's drowning in debt. Divorce cleaned him out 5 years ago, and he's been living beyond his means ever since. That's motive. Classic corruption story, Merle agreed. Needs money, has access to power, finds an opportunity. Except I need proof that'll stand up. Neil's evidence is good, but a defense attorney would tear it apart as hearsay from a disgruntled partner. I need Harvey to hang himself. Merle opened one of the equipment cases, revealing an array of surveillance devices. Then let's give him the rope. Over the next 2 days, Jack moved with the precision of a chess player setting pieces on a board. He maintained his routine, breakfast with Kurt, work calls, dinner with Rosie, while Merle's team worked in the shadows. They planted listening devices in Rosie's car and office. They installed miniature cameras in Harvey's apartment, building lobby and garage. They tracked both of their movements, building a detailed pattern of their activities. And Jack learned to wear a mask. You've been quiet lately, Rosie said over dinner on the second night. She'd made lasagna, his favorite, ironically. Or perhaps not ironically. Perhaps it was part of the performance, the devoted wife playing her role until the moment came to destroy him. Big project at work? Jack replied, cutting into his food. Across the table, Kurt was pushing food around his plate, shooting nervous glances at his father. Nothing to worry about. Rosie smiled. It was the same smile she'd given him when they'd married, but now Jack could see the calculation behind it. How long had she been acting? When had the woman he'd loved become this? "I've been thinking," she said, reaching across the table to touch his hand. Her fingers were cold. "Maybe we should plan a vacation. Just the three of us. Get away for a while." After the frame-up? Jack thought, but didn't say. Instead, he squeezed her hand and forced warmth into his voice. "That sounds nice. Where are you thinking?" "Somewhere warm. Caribbean, maybe." She was testing him, he realized, looking for any sign that he knew. "Let me finish this project first," he said. "Then we'll talk about it." That night, after Rosie was asleep, Jack slipped out to meet Merle at a diner on the edge of town. It was nearly 2 in the morning, and the place was empty except for a tired waitress and a trucker nursing black coffee. "We got something," Merle said, sliding a tablet across the table. "Your wife met with someone this afternoon." "Not Harvey." Jack looked at the surveillance photo. It showed Rosie sitting in a park with a man Jack didn't recognize. Mid-30s, expensive suit, the kind of polished appearance that suggested money and influence. "Who is he?" "Julian Parker. Lawyer. Corporate type, but here's where it gets interesting." Merle swiped to another image. "He also represents Harvey Moran in his divorce proceedings. And get this, he's the registered agent for 3 shell companies in the Cayman Islands. Shell companies that received wire transfers from the Veterans Fund over the last year." Jack felt the pieces clicking into place. So it's not just Harvey and Rosie. Parker's the money man. He's been helping them set up the offshore accounts. More than that, Merle pulled up another file. "Remember Louise Hughes, the former fund manager? I found her. She's living under a different name in Oregon. My contact up there had a conversation with her this morning. She's willing to talk. And she says Julian Parker approached her 2 years ago, wanted her to help skim money from the fund. When she refused, she started receiving threats. Anonymous letters, dead rats in her mailbox, the works. She quit and ran." Jack's jaw tightened. So they needed someone they could control. Enter Rosie. "Looks like it. Harvey probably vouched for her, told Parker she could be manipulated. The affair was icing on the cake, gave them another layer of control." Jack stared at the photo of Julian Parker. Here was the puppet master, the one pulling Harvey and Rosie's strings. And suddenly the scope of this thing became clear. This wasn't just about stealing from Veterans Fund. This was a systematic operation, and he'd become a convenient scapegoat. "There's something else," Merle said quietly. "Neil Alvarado. I visited him in the hospital today. How is he?" "Bad. Real bad. But he told me something he didn't put in the note." Merle hesitated. "Harvey's plan B. The one where he shows up and shoots you during a domestic disturbance? Parker's been pushing for that from the start. Says it's cleaner, less chance of exposure. Harvey's been resisting because he doesn't want to risk an investigation into the shooting, but Parker's getting impatient." Jack's expression didn't change, but his mind was already adjusting his timeline. If Parker was pushing Harvey to move to violence, then the 4-day window might be optimistic. "We need to accelerate," Jack said. "How fast can you give me a meeting with Louise Hughes?" "She's already on a plane. She'll be here tomorrow morning." "Good." Jack pulled out his phone and opened a notes app. "Here's what we're going to do. We're going to let them think their plan is working. We're going to give them exactly what they want, right up until the moment we take everything from them." Merle grinned. It was not a pleasant expression. "Now you're talking my language." Chapter 3. The Trap. Louise Hughes looked like a woman who'd spent 2 years glancing over her shoulder. She sat across from Jack and Merle's office, a nondescript building in an industrial park, wringing her hands and jumping at every sound from the street outside. "Thank you for coming," Jack said, keeping his voice gentle. He'd interviewed enough traumatized witnesses to know that Louise needed reassurance, not interrogation. "I almost didn't," she admitted. Her voice was raspy from years of smoking. "When your friend found me, I thought they'd sent someone to finish what they started. They don't know you're here. You're safe." Louise laughed bitterly. "Am I? You don't know these people. Julian Parker, he's not just some lawyer. He's got connections. Police, judges, politicians. That's how he knew he could get away with this. Tell me everything, Jack said. Start from the beginning. Over the next hour, Louise painted a picture of systematic corruption. Julian Parker had been operating his scheme for years, moving money through the Veterans Fund and other nonprofit organizations he'd infiltrated. The amounts were always small enough to avoid immediate detection, but over time, they added up to millions. He approached me at a fundraising gala, Louise said. Very smooth, very charming. Said he was impressed with my work, that he wanted to help the foundation grow. Next thing I knew, he was suggesting creative accounting to maximize our resources. When I realized what he was really proposing, I tried to back out. That's when the threats started? She nodded. At first it was subtle. Hang-up calls. My car getting keyed. Then it escalated. Someone broke into my house while I was sleeping and left a note on my pillow. It said, "Next time you won't wake up." That's when I knew I had to disappear. Why didn't you go to the police? Louise's laugh was hollow. Because Harvey Moran was one of the people threatening me. He showed up at my house in uniform, told me that if I made any accusations, he'd make sure I was the one who got investigated. With his badge and Parker's lawyers, who would believe me? Jack glanced at Merle, who was recording the conversation. This was gold, but it still wasn't enough. They needed something that would crack the whole operation open. Louise, Jack said carefully, do you still have any documentation? Anything that could prove Parker's involvement? She reached in her purse and pulled out a USB drive. I kept copies of everything. Bank statements, emails, memos. I was too scared to use them, but I couldn't bring myself to destroy them either. Jack took the drive like it was made of gold. This is exactly what we need. What are you going to do? Louise asked. I'm going to give them what they want, Jack said, and then I'm going to destroy them. That afternoon, Jack put the first phase of his counter-operation into motion. He created a series of digital breadcrumbs, emails from his computer to offshore accounts, searches for money laundering techniques in his browser history, encrypted files on his hard drive that would look damning if discovered. It was a mirror image of the frame-up they'd planned for him, except he was building it himself, with one crucial difference. He had detailed documentation of every step, time-stamped and stored with Merle's security team. You're making yourself look guilty, Merle observed as he watched Jack work. That's the idea. When they come for me, they're going to find exactly what they expect. But here's the thing. The evidence is too good. Too perfect. Any decent forensic accountant will be able to tell it was planted. And you're betting they won't look that closely? I'm betting their arrogance won't let them consider that possibility. Jack typed another line of code. Harvey and Rosie think they're the ones running a con. Parker thinks he's untouchable. None of them will believe I could outplay them. Merle shook his head admiringly. You're a cold son of a bitch, you know that. I learned from the best. Jack had spent years in military intelligence learning how to run double agents, how to turn enemies' strengths into weaknesses. This was just another operation, except the stakes were personal. That evening, Jack took Kurt to the movies, a superhero film the kid had been begging to see. They ate too much popcorn and laughed at the action sequences, and for 2 hours, Jack let himself pretend everything was normal. Dad, Kurt said as they walked back to the car, are you and Mom going to be okay? Jack stopped, crouching down to his son's eye level. The parking lot lights cast long shadows across the boy's worried face. I need you to trust me, Jack said. Things are going to get complicated for a little while. But I promise you, no matter what happens, no matter what anyone says, I'm going to make sure you're safe and taken care of. Okay. Kurt threw his arms around his father's neck. I love you, Dad. I love you too, buddy. Jack held his son tight, feeling the weight of what was coming. Then he stood, taking Kurt's hand. Come on, let's get home. The next morning, exactly 4 days after Jack had received Neil Alvarado's envelope, everything came to a head. Jack was in his home office when he heard car doors slamming outside. Through the window, he saw Harvey Moran and 3 other police officers approaching his house. Right on schedule, Rosie appeared in the office doorway, her face a mask of concern. Jack, there are police here. What's going on? Jack looked at his wife, really looked at her. Had she always been capable of this level of deception? Or had desperation turned her into someone new? I don't know, he said, and in that moment, he gave her one last chance. Rosie, if there's something you need to tell me, Anything at all. Now would be the time. For just a second, something flickered in her eyes. Doubt? Guilt? But then it was gone, replaced by perfect confusion. What are you talking about? The doorbell rang. Jack stood, straightening his shoulders. Let them in. Harvey Moran filled the doorway, his badge prominently displayed. 3 uniformed officers flanked him, hands resting casually near their weapons. Jack Beck. Harvey's voice was professionally neutral, but Jack could see the anticipation in his eyes. This was it, the moment Harvey had been planning for. That's me. I have a warrant for your arrest. Embezzlement and wire fraud. Harvey pulled out handcuffs. You have the right to remain silent. This is insane. Rosie's performance was flawless. Shock, indignation, fear. If Jack hadn't known better, he might have believed her. There must be some mistake. Ma'am, we have evidence that your husband has been stealing from the Veterans Fund your organization manages. Over $2 million transferred to offshore accounts. That's impossible. Jack would never. The transfers were initiated from his computer. Harvey continued, stone-faced. We have email records, digital signatures, everything we need. I'm sorry, Mrs. Beck, but your husband is facing serious federal charges. Jack extended his hands for the cuffs. As Harvey snapped them closed, Jack leaned in slightly and whispered, "How's Neil doing?" Harvey's face went blank for just a fraction of a second. Not enough for anyone else to notice, but Jack saw it. Saw the moment Harvey realized something was wrong. I don't know what you're talking about, Harvey said, but his voice had lost its certainty. No. Jack smiled, a cold, predatory expression. That's interesting, because I have a lot to talk about, and I think you're going to want to hear every word. As they led him out to the patrol car, Jack glanced back at his house. Kurt was watching from an upstairs window, his small face pressed against the glass. Jack gave him a subtle nod. Everything was going according to plan. The trap had been set. Now it was time to spring it. Chapter 4, The Gambit. The interrogation room was deliberately uncomfortable. Metal chairs, fluorescent lights, one-way mirror. Jack had been sitting there for 6 hours, occasionally visited by various detectives trying to get him to talk. He'd said nothing except to request his lawyer. What the police didn't know was that his lawyer was actually a federal agent Merle had connections with, a woman named Candace Terry from the FBI's white-collar crime division. She'd been investigating Julian Parker for 3 years on unrelated charges and was very interested in what Jack had to offer. When Candace finally entered the interrogation room, she played her part perfectly. Mid-40s, sharp suit, briefcase, the image of a corporate defense attorney. Mr. Beck, I'm Candace Terry. Your friend Merle Lamb retained my services. She set her briefcase on the table and turned to the detective who'd escorted her in. I need time with my client. Alone. The detective hesitated. We have questions, and Mr. Beck will answer them in due time, after he's consulted with counsel. Unless you'd like me to start filing motions about improper procedure. The detective left, but Jack knew Harvey Moran would be watching from behind the mirror. Candace sat down and pulled out a legal pad, purely for show. What she actually slid across to Jack was a small electronic device that would scramble any listening equipment. We're clear, she said quietly. You have about 10 minutes before they get suspicious. Jack leaned forward. How much did Merle tell you? Everything. And I've been making calls. Your evidence checks out. Julian Parker is dirty. Harvey Moran is dirty. And your wife is in the middle of it. But here's the problem. The frame-up is good. Really good. If we go to trial based solely on Neil Alvarado's testimony and Louise Hughes's records, a jury might not buy it. What do you need? I need one of them to flip. Preferably Harvey. He's the weak link. Parker's too smart and too insulated, and your wife. Candace paused. Your wife is cold enough that I don't think she'll break under pressure. Jack had already come to the same conclusion. So we make Harvey flip. How? By convincing him that Parker's about to throw him under the bus. Jack pulled out a photo from Candace's briefcase, one they'd prepared in advance. It showed Julian Parker meeting with another man at a coffee shop. This is Santos Shaw, an attorney who specializes in negotiating plea deals. Merle had them photographed together this morning. Harvey doesn't know Santos is actually one of your undercover agents. Candace smiled slowly. You want to make Harvey think Parker is cutting a deal without him. Exactly. Harvey's smart enough to know that in any conspiracy, the first person to cooperate gets the best deal. If he thinks Parker is about to leave him holding the bag, he'll race to the FBI to save himself. And what about your wife? Jack's expression hardened. Leave her to me. They put the plan in motion immediately. Candace arranged for Jack to be released on bail. Surprisingly easy, she explained, when you have an FBI agent pulling strings. Harvey was furious, Jack learned later, but he couldn't override a federal agent without raising questions. Jack went home to find Rosie waiting. She'd played the concerned wife perfectly, even posting on social media about the terrible misunderstanding and how she stood by her husband. It was a masterful performance. Jack, she threw her arms around him as soon as he walked in the door. Thank God. I've been so worried. Your lawyer says this is all a mistake, that someone must have hacked your computer. Where's Kurt? Jack interrupted. At my sister's. I thought it would be better if he wasn't here for all this. She pulled back, studying his face. Are you okay? You seem what? Different. There was something in her eyes now. Uncertainty. She was trying to read him, trying to figure out if he suspected anything. I've been arrested for a crime I didn't commit, Jack said flatly. Different feels appropriate. They stared at each other, and Jack wondered if she could see through his mask the way he'd learned to see through hers. For a moment, he almost wished she would confess, that she would give him some explanation that made sense. But then the moment passed, and she turned away. I made dinner, she said. You must be hungry. They ate in silence. Jack watched Rosie push food around her plate, saw the way she checked her phone every few minutes. She was texting someone, probably Harvey, probably panicking that their carefully constructed plan was falling apart. After dinner, Jack excused himself to his office. He had work to do. At midnight, Jack received a text from Merle, package delivered. The package was a carefully crafted piece of disinformation. Through a series of anonymous tips and leaked documents, they'd made sure Harvey saw photos of Julian Parker meeting with Santos Shaw. They'd included transcripts of fake conversations suggesting Parker was negotiating immunity in exchange for testifying against his co-conspirators. The bait was set. Now, they had to wait. They didn't wait long. At 2 a.m, Jack's burner phone rang. It was Candace Terry. Harvey just walked into the FBI field office, she said. He's asking to make a deal. Jack felt a surge of satisfaction. Don't make it easy for him. Make him earn it. Oh, don't worry. We're going to squeeze every drop out of him. Jack hung up and allowed himself a small smile. Phase 1 was complete. Harvey was about to give them everything they needed to take down Julian Parker, which left only one loose end, Rosie. Jack found her in their bedroom, awake and staring at her phone. When she saw him, she quickly locked the screen. Can't sleep? He asked. No. Her voice was tight. This whole thing, it's been a nightmare. Has it? Jack sat on the edge of the bed. Rosie, I need to ask you something, and I need you to be honest with me. She tensed. What? Are you having an affair? The question hung in the air between them. Jack watched her face cycle through emotions, surprise, indignation, fear, before settling on something like sorrow. Jack, why would you ask me that? Because I've been paying attention. The late nights, the secretive phone calls, the way you look at me like I'm someone you're trying to figure out rather than someone you love. For a moment, he thought she might actually tell the truth. But then she shook her head, tears forming in her eyes. I'm not having an affair, she said. I love you. I know things have been strange lately, but that's because... She hesitated. Because I've been worried about you. About us. I thought maybe we were drifting apart, and I didn't know how to fix it. It was a good lie. If Jack hadn't known better, he might have believed it. Okay, he said simply. I believe you. Relief flooded her face. Thank you. Jack, I promise. But I need you to do something for me. He pulled out a document. Divorce papers he'd had Merle draw up. I need you to sign these. Her relief evaporated. What? What? Because if I'm going to beat these charges, I can't have my personal life complicating things. My lawyer says it'll look better if we're legally separated. Shows the prosecution they can't use you against me. It was complete nonsense, of course, but Rosie didn't know enough about legal strategy to question it. Jack, I don't want to get divorced. It's temporary, just until this is over. Please, Rosie, I need you to trust me. She stared at the papers, her mind clearly racing. Jack could see her weighing options, calculating angles. Finally, she picked up a pen. For you, she said, signing her name. Because I love you. Jack took the papers, feeling nothing but cold satisfaction. Thank you. This will make everything easier. He left the bedroom before she could see his expression. Chapter 5. The Confession. Harvey Moran's cooperation was a beautiful thing to watch. Over the next 48 hours, he gave the FBI everything: detailed records of the embezzlement scheme, evidence of Julian Parker's criminal network, testimony about how they'd planned to frame Jack. But Candace Terry wanted more. She wanted Harvey to wear a wire. Parker doesn't know I've flipped yet, Harvey explained during a meeting at the FBI field office. Jack was there, watching through a video feed from another room. He's been calling me, wanting to meet. Says we need to discuss damage control. Then meet with him, Candace said. Get him to implicate himself on tape. He's not stupid. If I wear a wire and he finds it, he won't find it. She slid a tiny device across the table. Latest technology, completely undetectable. And we'll have agents positioned nearby in case things go south. Harvey picked up the device, his hand shaking slightly. For all his corruption, he wasn't a brave man, just a greedy one who'd gotten in over his head. What about Rosie? Harvey asked. Is she cooperating? Not yet, Candace said. But she will. Through the video feed, Jack watched Harvey's face carefully. There was something there, not quite guilt, but close. A hint of conscience buried under layers of justification and self-preservation. She's not a bad person, Harvey said quietly. She got desperate. Her gambling debts were crushing her, and Parker knew it. He used it against her, promised he could make her problems disappear if she helped him access the Veterans Fund. Jack's hands clenched. He hadn't known about gambling debts. Rosie had hidden them well. And you? Candace asked. What's your excuse? Harvey laughed bitterly. Same as everyone, I guess. I needed money. Parker offered it. I told myself it was just this once, just to get back on my feet after the divorce. But one time became two became three. He shook his head. You ever notice how easy it is to justify things to yourself? By the end, I'd convinced myself I wasn't really hurting anyone. It was just money from a fund that had plenty. Veterans were still getting their benefits. No real harm done. Except you were planning to frame an innocent man, Candace said coldly. That was Parker's idea. I didn't want to, but you went along with it. You were ready to destroy Jack Beck's life, send him to prison, traumatize his son. And for what? Money. Harvey had no answer to that. Watching from the other room, Jack felt a strange absence of anger. He'd expected to feel rage at Harvey's admissions, but instead, there was only a cold calculation. Harvey was a tool, useful for taking down Parker and building the case against Rosie, but ultimately just another corrupt cop who'd made bad choices. The real anger Jack felt was reserved for Rosie. She'd gambled away their security, lied to him for months, planned to destroy him. And through it all, she'd smiled and pretended to be the loving wife. That kind of betrayal deserves something special. The meeting between Harvey and Julian Parker took place at an upscale restaurant downtown. Harvey wore the FBI's wire, and a team of agents watched from various positions, some posing as diners, others positioned in a surveillance van outside. Jack listened to the feed from Candace's office, Merle standing beside him. Can't believe they let Beck out on bail. Parker's smooth voice came through the speakers. That's unexpected. His lawyer's good, Harvey replied. Jack could hear the tension in his voice. Federal agent, apparently. She's already poking holes in the evidence. That's impossible. We covered everything. Did we? Because I'm starting to think maybe we rushed this. Maybe we should have waited, been more careful. There was a pause. Jack imagined Parker studying Harvey, trying to read him. You're not getting cold feet. Are you, Harvey? Parker's tone had shifted, friendly exterior stripped away to reveal something harder underneath. I'm being realistic. If Beck's lawyer finds even one thread to pull, the whole thing could unravel. And if it does, we stick to the plan. We have documentation. We have evidence. We have everything we need. Beck's military background makes him the perfect scapegoat. Even if he fights the charges, the publicity alone will destroy him. And what about Rosie? What about her? She plays the devastated wife, helps the prosecution, and after Beck's convicted, she gets her share of the money. Everyone wins. Except Beck. Except Beck, Parker agreed. But that's his problem, not ours. Harvey, listen to me. You're a soldier in this. You follow orders, you do your job, and you get paid. That's how this works. Don't start developing a conscience now. In Candace's office, Jack listened to Parker condemn himself with every word. The FBI agent was smiling. We've got him, she said. Parker just confessed to conspiracy, fraud, and intent to frame you. That's enough to arrest him tonight. Do it, Jack said. Merle clapped him on the shoulder. One down, one to go. Jack nodded, but his mind was already on the next phase. Julian Parker's arrest would panic Rosie, make her realize that her carefully constructed scheme was collapsing. And in that panic, she would make mistakes. Mistakes Jack fully intended to exploit. Chapter 6. The Confrontation. Julian Parker was arrested at his home at 3 in the morning. The FBI executed search warrants simultaneously at his office, his vacation house in Aspen, and his safe deposit boxes. By sunrise, the news was everywhere. Prominent lawyer arrested in massive embezzlement scheme. Jack watched the coverage from his garage, drinking coffee and waiting. He didn't have to wait long. At 6:30, Rosie burst into the garage, still in her pajamas, her phone clutched in her hand. Did you see the news? Julian Parker was arrested. They're saying he stole millions from nonprofit organizations, that he was running some kind of criminal enterprise. She stopped, studying Jack's calm expression. You don't seem surprised. Should I be? Jack, what's going on? First you get arrested. Now Parker. Is there some connection I'm not seeing? Jack set down his coffee mug. This was the moment he'd been planning for. Rosie, I need you to be very careful about what you say next. Her face paled. What are you talking about? Julian Parker is naming co-conspirators. Harvey Moran is cooperating with the FBI, and the walls are closing in. Jack pulled out his phone and played one of the recordings from Harvey's wire. Parker's voice filled the garage. Rosie plays the devastated wife, helps the prosecution. Rosie's hand flew to her mouth. Oh my God, 8 months, Jack said, his voice eerily calm. You've been planning this for 8 months. The affair, the embezzlement, the frame-up, all of it. Jack, I can explain. Can you? Because I'd love to hear how you explain planning to send me to prison for a crime you committed. How you explain sleeping with a corrupt cop while pretending to be my wife. How you explain being willing to destroy our son's father. Tears were streaming down Rosie's face now. I didn't want to. You don't understand. I had debts, horrible debts, and Parker said he could help, that it would be easy, that no one would get hurt. No one would get hurt. Jack's composure cracked slightly. You were going to send me to federal prison. You were going to traumatize Kurt. You were going to destroy everything I've built. I'm sorry. Rosie was sobbing now. I'm so sorry, Jack. I made terrible mistakes. I got in too deep, and I didn't know how to get out. So you decided to sacrifice me instead. Jack stood, looming over her. Here's what's going to happen now, Rosie. You're going to cooperate with the FBI. You're going to testify against Parker and Harvey. You're going to admit everything you've done. They'll send me to prison. Yes, they will. But if you cooperate, maybe you'll get a reduced sentence. Maybe you'll be out while Kurt is still young enough to know you. And if I don't cooperate, Jack's smile was cold. Then I make sure you get the maximum sentence. I have evidence you don't even know about. Recordings, documents, testimony from Louise Hughes. I have enough to bury you so deep you'll never see sunlight again. Your choice. Rosie sank into a chair, her body shaking with sobs. I never wanted this. I never wanted to hurt you. But you did. Jack felt no sympathy, only a hollow satisfaction. You made your choices, Rosie. Now you get to live with the consequences. What about Kurt? Kurt will be fine. He'll live with me. He'll have a father who loves him and tells him the truth. And maybe, someday, if you're lucky, he'll forgive you. Jack, please. My lawyer will be in touch about your cooperation agreement. Jack walked toward the garage door. I suggest you get a good attorney. You're going to need one. He left her there, crying in his garage, and felt absolutely nothing. Chapter 7. The Dominoes. The investigation moved with the speed and force of an avalanche once Harvey and Rosie both agreed to cooperate. Federal agents tore through Julian Parker's empire, finding evidence of not just the Veterans Fund scheme, but a dozen other frauds spanning years. Jack watched it all unfold from a distance, focusing on rebuilding his life. He'd taken extended leave from his consulting job and was spending every possible moment with Kurt, trying to shield him from the worst of the fallout while being honest about what had happened. "Is Mom go to jail?" Kurt asked one evening as they sat on the back porch, watching the sunset. "Yes," Jack said. "There was no point in lying. She did some very bad things, and she has to face consequences." "Did she stop loving us?" Jack pulled his son close. "I don't know, buddy. I think maybe she got lost, made some really bad choices, and couldn't find her way back." "Do you still love her?" It was a question Jack had asked himself countless times over the past weeks. "I love the person I thought she was, the person I married. But that person, I don't think she exists anymore." Kurt was quiet for a long moment. "I'm glad you found out. About all of it. If you hadn't—" He didn't finish the sentence. "I know," Jack said softly. "But I did find out. And I'm never going to let anyone hurt you like that. That's a promise." 3 weeks after Julian Parker's arrest, the full scope of his operation became public. It turned out the Veterans Fund was just one of 7 nonprofit organizations he'd infiltrated and defrauded over the years. The total amount stolen exceeded $15 million. But it was the human cost that made headlines. One organization he'd targeted provided housing for homeless veterans. His theft had forced them to close their facility, putting dozens of vulnerable people back on the streets. Another provided medical assistance to veterans suffering from PTSD. Parker's fraud had eliminated their entire operating budget. As these stories emerged, public opinion turned viciously against everyone involved in the scheme. Harvey Morand became the face of police corruption. Rosie became the ultimate betrayer, the woman who'd stolen from the very people she was supposed to help. And Jack became something of a folk hero, the veteran who'd been targeted by a massive conspiracy and fought back using intelligence and determination rather than violence. He hated it. "You did good," Merle told him over beers one evening at a quiet bar far from the media circus. "You took down 3 major criminals and exposed a massive fraud operation. That's worth celebrating." "I didn't do it to be a hero," Jack said. "I did it because they tried to destroy my life." "Still counts." Merle raised his glass. "To justice. To survival," Jack corrected, clinking bottles. They drank in silence for a moment before Merle spoke again. "What are you going to do now?" "The FBI's offering you a consulting position. Counter-fraud investigation. Says your skills will be valuable." Jack had received that offer. He'd also received offers from 3 private security firms, 2 news networks wanting to interview him, and a book publisher interested in his story. He turned them all down. "I'm going to be a father," Jack said simply. "Kurt's going to need me more than ever once Rosie's sentenced. Everything else, it can wait." Merle nodded approvingly. "Smart man. I try." Jack took another drink. "What about you? Still chasing corrupt executives for corporate clients?" "Actually, I've been thinking about making a change." Merle grinned. "Candace Terry offered me a position with the FBI's white-collar crime unit. Apparently, my particular skill set is in demand. You'd be good at it. High praise coming from you." They finished their beers in comfortable silence, 2 soldiers who'd survived different kinds of warfare and come out the other side. Chapter 8. The Reckoning. Julian Parker's trial was a media spectacle. The prosecution had an embarrassment of riches. Harvey's recordings, Rosie's testimony, Louise Hughes's documentation, and mountains of financial evidence. Parker's defense team fought hard, but they were doomed from the start. Jack attended every day of the trial, sitting in the gallery and watching justice grind forward. He wanted Parker to see him, wanted the lawyer to know that the man he'd tried to destroy was still standing. On the witness stand, Rosie looked small and broken. She testified in a monotone voice, detailing her involvement in the scheme, her affair with Harvey, the plan to frame Jack. The jury watched her with undisguised disgust. "Mrs. Beck," the prosecutor asked, Why did you agree to participate in this scheme? Rosie's voice was barely audible. I had gambling debts. Over $300,000. Parker found out and said he could make them disappear if I helped him access the Veterans Fund. I was desperate. And framing your husband? Whose idea was that? Parker's. He said we needed someone to take the fall if anything went wrong. He chose Jack because of his military background and security clearance. Said it would be believable that a veteran with PTSD might steal from other veterans. Did you object to this plan? A long pause. No. Why not? Because... Rosie's voice broke. Because by that point, I convinced myself Jack would be fine. That he was smart enough to beat the charges, or that Harvey would make sure the evidence wasn't too strong. I told myself lies so I could live with what I was doing. And now I know I'm a coward and a terrible person. I destroyed my family. I betrayed the man who loved me. I stole from people who needed help. And I have to live with that for the rest of my life. It was the most honest thing Jack had heard her say in months. Not that it changed anything. Harvey testified next, his police career in ruins, facing his own federal charges despite his cooperation. He described how Parker had recruited him, how the scheme had evolved, how they'd manufactured evidence against Jack. Did you ever consider that what you were doing was wrong? The prosecutor asked. Every day, Harvey said flatly. But I did anyway. That's the thing about corruption. It doesn't happen all at once. It's a series of small compromises, each one easier than the last, until you wake up one day and realize you've become everything you swore to fight against. When Louise Hughes took the stand, her testimony was damning. She described Parker's intimidation tactics in detail, producing evidence of threats and harassment that went back years. The jury looked horrified. Finally, Parker himself testified. He was polished and confident, denying everything despite the mountain of evidence against him. He portrayed himself as a victim of overzealous prosecution, claimed Harvey and Rosie were lying to save themselves, suggested Jack had manufactured evidence out of revenge. It was a masterful performance. It was also completely ineffective. The jury deliberated for 3 hours. Guilty on all counts. Julian Parker's face showed no emotion as the verdict was read, but Jack saw his hands clench on the defense table. The judge remanded him to custody immediately, and as federal marshals led him away, Parker's eyes found Jack in the gallery. There was no remorse in that gaze, only cold calculation, as if Parker was already planning his appeal, his next move, his eventual revenge. Jack stared back, unflinching. Let Parker plot all he wanted. He'd still spend the next 20 years in a federal prison. Outside the courthouse, Jack was mobbed by reporters. He gave them nothing, just walked to his car, where Kurt was waiting with Merle. Is it over? Kurt asked. Almost, Jack said. One more thing. Chapter 9, The Aftermath. Rosie's sentencing hearing was scheduled for a month after Parker's conviction. In the interim, Jack finalized the divorce, established sole custody of Kurt, and began the slow process of rebuilding their lives. The house felt different without Rosie, emptier but somehow more honest. Jack and Kurt established new routines, new traditions. They started having breakfast together every morning, really talking rather than just going through the motions. Kurt joined a youth baseball league, and Jack never missed a game. Slowly, the media attention faded. Other scandals captured the public's interest. Life moved on. On the day of Rosie's sentencing, Jack brought Kurt to the courthouse. The boy deserved to see the end of this chapter, to understand that actions had consequences. Rosie stood before the judge, her lawyer beside her. She lost weight, looked years older than she had just months ago. When her eyes found Jack and Kurt in the gallery, she began to cry. The judge was not impressed. Mrs. Beck, you have pleaded guilty to conspiracy to commit wire fraud, embezzlement, and obstruction of justice. The prosecution has recommended a sentence of 5 to 7 years in federal prison in exchange for your cooperation. However, I must consider the nature of your crimes. The judge looked down at his notes. You stole from a fund designed to help veterans, the very people you were entrusted to serve. You participated in a scheme to frame your innocent husband for your crimes. You showed no remorse until you were caught. These are not the actions of someone who made a simple mistake. These are the actions of someone who systematically betrayed every person who trusted them. Rosie was sobbing now, her lawyer trying to steady her. However, the judge continued, I also note your cooperation with federal authorities, which helped bring down a larger criminal enterprise. I note your previously clean record and your expressed remorse. He paused, letting the tension build. I hereby sentence you to 6 years in federal prison, followed by 3 years of supervised release. You will also pay restitution in the amount of your portion of the stolen funds, plus additional fines to be determined. You are remanded to custody immediately to begin serving your sentence. Rosie collapsed. Marshals had to support her as they led her away. As she passed Jack and Kurt, she whispered, I'm sorry. I'm so sorry. Jack said nothing. Kurt squeezed his father's hand tightly. Outside the courthouse, away from reporters and cameras, father and son sat on a bench in the autumn sunshine. How do you feel? Jack asked. Kurt thought about it. Sad, but also okay. Is that weird? No, buddy. It's not weird at all. Do you think Mom will be different when she gets out? Better. I don't know, Jack admitted. I hope so. For her sake, if not for ours. Will we visit her? In prison. Jack pulled his son close. That's up to you. If you want to, we will. If you don't, that's okay too. No pressure either way. They sat in silence for a while, watching people walk by, lawyers and defendants, families and reporters, the endless flow of humanity through the justice system. Dad, Kurt said eventually. Yeah. Thank you. For protecting us. For figuring everything out. Jack felt something tight in his chest loosen. Always, kid. That's my job. Protecting you. You're really good at it. I try. Jack stood, offering his hand. Come on. Let's go home. 6 months later, Jack stood in his garage, working on the motorcycle he'd never quite finished. The engine was finally assembled, the chrome polished, the leather seat restored. It was beautiful, a testament to patience and careful craftsmanship. Kurt was at a friend's house. Merle was starting his new job with the FBI next week. Neil Alvarado had completed his physical therapy and returned to active duty with the police department. Harvey's position, ironically. Louise Hughes had used her testimony and the publicity to launch a nonprofit focused on protecting whistleblowers in the charity sector. And Jack was finally breathing. The nightmares had stopped. The constant vigilance had eased. He could sleep through the night again, could laugh at stupid jokes, could imagine a future that looked like something other than a battlefield. His phone buzzed. A text from Candace Terry. Coffee next week? Have a case that might interest you. Nothing too intense, just a financial discrepancy that needs someone with your particular skills. Jack smiled. Maybe he would take that consulting job after all. Not because he needed to be a hero or because he was trying to prove something, but because he was good at it, because he could help people, because sometimes the skills you learned in darkness could be used to bring light. He texted back, send me the details. Then he returned to his motorcycle, his hands steady and sure, building something that would carry him forward into whatever came next. Because that's what survivors did. They rebuilt. They moved forward. They found ways to turn their scars into armor and their pain into purpose. Jack Beck had been tested in ways most people couldn't imagine. He'd faced betrayal, corruption, and a conspiracy designed to destroy him. And he'd won, not through violence or revenge, but through intelligence, determination, and a simple refusal to let evil people write his story. The motorcycle's engine rumbled to life, perfectly tuned. Jack smiled. It was a good sound. The sound of something fixed. The sound of new beginning. The sound of victory. And there you have it. Another story comes to an end. What did you think? I'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments below. If you enjoy this story, consider joining our community by subscribing. It means the world to us. For more stories like this one, check out the recommended videos on screen. And I'll see you there. Welcome back to another story on Infidelity Tales Lab. Before we begin, tell us, where in the world are you watching from? Now let's dive into today's story. Chapter 1, The Masquerade. Ted Graham stepped off the city bus with the practiced ease of someone who had been riding public transportation for months. His worn leather shoes hit the pavement with a soft thud, and he adjusted the collar of his simple button-down shirt. To any observer, He looked like just another middle-aged man struggling to make ends meet after a difficult divorce. The truth was far more complex. Ted had built his entire post-divorce life around this carefully constructed facade. Every morning, he would leave his modest apartment in the working-class neighborhood of Riverside Heights, take the bus to downtown, and spend his days at the public library or coffee shops, maintaining the appearance of a man searching for work. What no one knew, not his ex-wife Lucille, not her new husband Raymond Newman, not even his own children, was that Ted Graham was worth over $50 million. The transformation had taken 2 years to perfect. After discovering Lucille's affair with Raymond, a successful real estate developer, Ted had quietly liquidated his tech consulting business through a series of shell companies. His partners never knew he was the silent owner of the algorithms that had made their firm one of the most sought after in Silicon Valley. While they thought they were buying him out during the divorce proceedings, Ted had actually sold them technology he'd already replaced with something far more advanced. The divorce had been brutal. Lucille's lawyer, armed with private investigators and financial experts, had dissected Ted's apparent assets with surgical precision. They found his modest consulting income, his small savings account, and the heavily mortgaged house they'd shared for 15 years. What they didn't find were the offshore accounts, the cryptocurrency wallets, or the intellectual property holdings that constituted his real wealth. Ted's phone buzzed as he walked down Fifth Street. A text from his eldest daughter. "Monica, Dad, can you make it to dinner Sunday? Mom says you've been struggling, and we thought." He deleted the message without finishing it. Monica had chosen her side during the divorce, believing her mother's carefully crafted narrative of Ted's supposed failures as a husband and provider. The irony wasn't lost on him. While Lucille paraded around town with Raymond, spending what she thought was the majority of Ted's assets from their settlement, Ted was quietly assembling the pieces of his revenge. It had taken 18 months of patient observation, careful planning, and strategic positioning. Now, as he approached the Starbucks where he'd accidentally encountered them today, Ted allowed himself a small smile. The coffee shop was busy with the usual lunch crowd. Ted ordered his regular, a small coffee, black, and found a table near the window. He pulled out a worn paperback novel and settled in to wait. Patience had become his greatest virtue since the divorce. Every move had to be calculated, every encounter planned down to the last detail. At 2:15 p.m., exactly as their routine dictated, Lucille and Raymond walked through the door. She was laughing at something he'd said, her hand resting possessively on his arm. Raymond Newman was everything Ted appeared not to be: tall, confident, impeccably dressed in a suit that probably cost more than most people's monthly rent. His success in real estate had made him a prominent figure in the city's social circles, and Lucille basked in the reflected glory. Ted watched them order their drinks, a non-fat vanilla latte for her, an espresso for him, and find a table across the room. They were creatures of habit, these two. It made them predictable, and predictability was a weakness Ted had learned to exploit. Ted Graham. Lucille's voice carried across the coffee shop with calculated surprise. She approached his table with Raymond trailing behind, her expression a perfect mask of concerned ex-wife. "I almost didn't recognize you." Ted looked up from his book, feigning mild embarrassment. "Oh, hi, Lucille." "Raymond." He nodded politely to the man who had destroyed his marriage. "Still taking the bus?" Lucille asked, her tone carrying just enough mockery to sting while maintaining plausible deniability. "I saw you getting off the number 12 when we drove past earlier." Raymond shifted uncomfortably beside her, clearly recognizing the cruelty in his wife's comment. For all his faults, he wasn't entirely without conscience. "Lucille," he said quietly, a warning in his voice. But Ted was ready for this moment. He'd been preparing for it for months. "Yeah, well, you know how it is," he said with a self-deprecating shrug. "Budget's pretty tight these days." As he spoke, Ted raised his coffee cup to his lips, and Raymond's eyes locked onto his wrist. The watch was subtle, no flashy gold or ostentatious diamonds, but Raymond Newman knew luxury when he saw it. His face went pale as he processed what he was looking at. That's a Patek Philippe Grandmaster chime," Raymond whispered, his voice barely audible. That's a $2 million limited edition. Ted glanced down at his wrist, as if noticing the watch for the first time. Oh, this old thing. He smiled with practiced nonchalance. Family heirloom. Grandfather left it to me. Lucille's face had gone from smug satisfaction to confusion to dawning horror in the span of seconds. She knew Ted's family history better than anyone. His grandfather had been a coal miner who died without a penny to his name. But that's impossible, she stammered. The divorce settlement. Your assets. We had investigators. Ted stood up slowly, his book tucked under his arm. Assets can be very tricky things, Lucille. Sometimes they're right where you least expect them. He turned to Raymond, whose face had now gone from pale to ashen. Nice seeing you both. Take care. As he walked out of the coffee shop, Ted could hear the urgent whispers behind him. The first crack in their perfect world had just appeared, and Ted Graham was just getting started. Chapter 2. The Foundation. The penthouse apartment overlooking Harbor Bay was nothing like the modest studio in Riverside Heights, where Ted maintained his public residence. Floor-to-ceiling windows offered a panoramic view of the city skyline, while carefully curated art pieces adorned the walls, investments that had appreciated considerably since Ted's quiet acquisitions through various auction houses. Ted poured himself 2 fingers of 30-year-old Macallan and settled into his leather chair, opening his laptop to review the surveillance reports. His team of private investigators had been tracking Lucille and Raymond for over a year, building comprehensive profiles of their habits, weaknesses, and vulnerabilities. What they discovered went far beyond simple adultery. The affair had started 3 years before their divorce, when Lucille began working as an interior designer for Raymond's real estate developments. Their relationship had been built on a foundation of mutual greed and social ambition. Raymond saw in Lucille a refined, cultured woman who could help him break into the city's elite social circles. Lucille saw in Raymond the wealthy, successful husband she felt she deserved. What neither of them knew was that Ted had been aware of their affair from the beginning. His background in cybersecurity had made it child's play to monitor Lucille's communications. He'd read every text message, every email, listened to every phone call where they'd mocked his supposed inadequacies and planned their future together. They'd laughed about his mediocre consulting business, his boring personality, his lack of social connections. Most painfully, they'd speculated about how quickly they could push through a divorce and minimize Ted's share of what they assumed were modest marital assets. The divorce proceedings had been Ted's masterclass in strategic deception. He'd hired a deliberately mediocre lawyer, presented financial documents that showed exactly what he wanted them to see, and played the role of the wounded, naive husband to perfection. When Lucille's shark of an attorney had demanded 70% of their assets, Ted had reluctantly agreed after putting up just enough fight to make it seem realistic. Lucille had walked away with what she thought was the lion's share: the house, which Ted had secretly remortgaged to the hilt, his consulting business, which was already being dissolved, and most of their visible savings. Ted had kept his old truck, some personal belongings, and what appeared to be a modest retirement account. The judge had even ordered Ted to pay alimony, which he'd done with apparent reluctance. What made it perfect was that Ted's actual wealth existed in a complex web of shell companies, offshore accounts, and intellectual property holdings that his own business partners didn't fully understand. The algorithms he developed weren't just valuable, they were revolutionary. Major tech companies had been quietly licensing his innovations for years through intermediary firms, generating revenue streams that Lucille's investigators never could have traced back to him. Ted's phone rang, interrupting his review. The caller ID showed Bob Briggs, his most trusted investigator. They're panicking, Bob reported without preamble. Raymond spent 3 hours on the phone with his financial advisor after the coffee shop incident. Lucille called her divorce attorney twice and tried reaching the private investigator they used during the proceedings. And what do they find? Nothing yet, but they're looking harder. Raymond's particularly rattled. He knows watches, and seeing that Patek Philippe has him questioning everything he thought he knew about your financial situation. Ted smiled. Good. Fear makes people sloppy. What about the children? Bob's tone grew more serious. Monica and Stephen are still completely in the dark. They genuinely believe you're struggling financially. Last week, Monica tried to give you money for groceries, remember? The memories stung. Monica, his 23-year-old daughter, had approached him outside the library with $50 and tears in her eyes, begging him to accept help. She thought her father was too proud to admit he was barely getting by. What she didn't know was that her mother had been systematically poisoning her against Ted for 3 years, using his apparent financial struggles as evidence of his failures as a man and father. Stephen, his 20-year-old son, had been even more direct. He'd accused Ted of being a deadbeat who was trying to guilt-trip the family. The boy now lived with Lucille and Raymond, referring to Raymond as a real man who takes care of his responsibilities. Any change in their relationship with their mother? Ted asked. None. If anything, they're more protective of her now that she's remarried. They see Raymond as saving her from your supposed inadequacies. Ted closed his eyes. His children's betrayal cut deeper than Lucille's affair ever had. During the divorce, he'd hoped they would see through their mother's manipulation, but Lucille had been masterful in her campaign. She'd painted herself as the long-suffering wife of a man too weak and incompetent to provide for his family, finally finding happiness with someone who could give her the life she deserved. What about Raymond's business? That's where it gets interesting, Bob continued. Newman Development is highly leveraged right now. They're in the middle of 3 major projects that are all behind schedule and over budget. Raymond's been using personal assets as collateral to keep the company afloat, betting everything on a luxury resort development that's been plagued with problems. Ted leaned forward. What kind of problems? Environmental issues, permit delays, cost overruns. The initial investors are getting nervous, and Raymond's been scrambling to find additional funding. He's got about 6 months before the whole thing comes crashing down if he can't secure another $20 million in backing. This was exactly the kind of information Ted had been waiting for. Raymond's apparent success was built on a house of cards, and Ted now had a clear view of every supporting beam. Start phase 2, Ted instructed. I want you to make contact with the resort investors. Use the Morrison Group identity. They'll never connect it back to me. And Bob, make sure our friend Raymond knows that someone's been asking questions about his financial stability. After ending the call, Ted walked to his window and looked out at the city lights. 20 stories below, people were living their ordinary lives, unaware of the carefully orchestrated game being played in the shadows above them. In 6 months, maybe less, Lucille and Raymond would understand what it felt like to lose everything. But unlike Ted's manufactured poverty, their fall would be devastatingly real. The second phase of his revenge was about to begin. Chapter 3, The Bait. The Riverside Community Center's job training workshop was the perfect cover for Ted's next move. For 6 months, he'd been volunteering there twice a week, teaching basic computer skills to unemployed workers. It served multiple purposes. It reinforced his image as a man struggling to find purpose after his fall from grace. It provided him with a legitimate reason to be in the area, and most importantly, it had introduced him to Frank Wells. Frank was a 55-year-old former construction foreman who'd been laid off when the economy tanked. He was intelligent, desperate, and most crucially, he had 20 years of experience in large-scale construction projects. Ted had been cultivating their friendship for months, positioning himself as a fellow victim of circumstances beyond his control. You know, Frank, Ted said as they cleaned up after the evening's computer class, I keep thinking about what you said last week about those resort projects cutting corners on safety inspections. Frank looked up from stacking chairs. Yeah, it's getting worse out there. These developers are so focused on profit margins, they forget that real people are going to be living and working in these places. You mentioned Newman Development specifically. That's my ex-wife's new husband's company. Raymond Newman? Frank's expression darkened. That guy's a piece of work. I worked on 2 of his projects before I got laid off. Safety violations, substandard materials, bribing inspectors, the whole 9 yards. I tried to blow the whistle, but who's going to believe a laid-off construction worker over a guy with Newman's connections? Ted had been carefully steering their conversations toward this topic for weeks. Frank's accusations weren't just the bitter complaints of a disgruntled employee. Ted's investigators had confirmed every detail. Raymond's corner cutting went far beyond normal cost management. He was actively endangering lives to maximize profits. That's terrible, Ted said with apparent sincerity. But surely there's someone you could report this to? Frank laughed bitterly. I tried. Filed complaints with the city, the state, even contacted a couple of journalists. Newman's got too many people in his pocket. My complaints disappeared into the bureaucracy, and I got blacklisted from every major construction project in the tri-state area. This was exactly what Ted had hoped to hear. Frank Wells wasn't just a potential ally. He was a man with legitimate grievances and inside knowledge of Raymond's illegal activities. More importantly, he was someone who couldn't be traced back to Ted. What if someone could give you proof? Ted asked carefully. Hard evidence that couldn't be ignored? Frank stopped what he was doing and studied Ted's face. What kind of proof? Ted pulled out his phone and showed Frank a series of photographs. They showed construction workers at Newman development sites ignoring safety protocols, using substandard materials, and working on projects that clearly hadn't passed proper inspections. What Frank didn't know was that Ted had paid a team of professional photographers to document these violations over the past 6 months. How did you get these? Frank whispered. Let's just say I've been doing some research on my ex-wife's new life, Ted replied. I initially wanted to understand what she saw in him, but what I found was disturbing. Frank studied the images more closely. This is the Ocean View project. See that steel framework in the background? Those support beams are rated for commercial use, not residential. The building plans I saw specified industrial-grade materials. Could you identify other violations if you saw more evidence? Absolutely. But Ted, if these photos got out, it would destroy Newman's company. We're talking about criminal charges, massive lawsuits, people losing their life savings. Ted met Frank's eyes. Would that be such a terrible thing? How many people might get hurt if these violations go unreported? Frank was quiet for a long moment. You're right. But even with these photos, I need access to the actual building plans, inspection reports, material purchase orders. Without documentation proving he intentionally used substandard materials, it's just a safety violation that could be explained away as contractor error. What if I told you I might be able to get you that documentation? I'd say you're playing a dangerous game. Newman's not just wealthy, he's connected. Cross him the wrong way, and you might find yourself in serious trouble. Ted smiled. Frank, I've already lost everything that mattered to me. My wife, my children, my financial security, it's all gone. What's left for him to take? What Frank didn't realize was that Ted's access to Raymond's documentation wasn't theoretical. Through his cybersecurity expertise and a carefully planned social engineering campaign, Ted had been collecting Newman Development's internal communications and files for months. He had emails discussing material substitutions, inspection reports that had been falsified, and financial records showing payments to city officials. But more than that, Ted had been using his vast resources to orchestrate a perfect storm around Raymond's business. The environmental issues plaguing the resort project, Ted had quietly funded the environmental groups that had filed the complaints. The permit delays? Ted's shell companies had been filing competing applications and appeals that gummed up the bureaucratic process. The cost overruns? Ted had been systematically outbidding Raymond's company for qualified subcontractors, forcing them to use inferior alternatives. I need to think about this, Frank said finally. Of course. But Frank, how many more buildings like these need to go up before someone gets seriously hurt? How many families need to lose their homes to shoddy construction before someone with the knowledge to stop it takes action? As they walked out of the community center together, Ted could see the internal struggle playing out on Frank's face. The man wanted to do the right thing, but years of being ignored and marginalized had made him cautious. Ted's phone buzzed with a text message. It was from an unknown number. We need to talk. Tomorrow, 3 p.m., Central Park, South Entrance. Come alone. R. Raymond had taken the bait. The coffee shop encounter had rattled him enough to break his own rules about maintaining distance from Ted. Now he was making mistakes, acting emotionally instead of strategically. Everything okay? Frank asked, noticing Ted's expression. Just my ex-wife's husband, Ted replied with a weary sigh. Apparently, he wants to have a conversation. Be careful, Ted. Men like Newman don't just want to talk. They want to intimidate, to remind you of your place in the pecking order. Ted nodded gravely. Don't worry. I know exactly what kind of man Raymond Newman is. As Frank walked away, Ted allowed himself a moment of satisfaction. Phase 2 was proceeding perfectly. Raymond was scared enough to break cover. Frank was primed to become his unwitting weapon against Newman development, and Ted's investigators had just confirmed that the resort project's financial backing was more fragile than Raymond realized. Tomorrow's meeting would be the beginning of Raymond's downfall. But first, Ted needed to complete one final preparation. He had a phone call to make to a very special kind of lawyer, the kind who specialized in whistleblower protections and construction safety violations. The kind of lawyer who would soon have a very lucrative case to pursue. Chapter 4. The Confrontation. Central Park's south entrance was bustling with afternoon joggers and tourists when Ted arrived at precisely 3 p.m. He spotted Raymond immediately. The man was pacing near the information kiosk, his expensive suit making him stand out among the casual park visitors. Raymond's usual confidence had been replaced by visible agitation, and Ted could see the tension in his shoulders from 50 yards away. Ted approached slowly, maintaining the posture and gait of a man worn down by circumstance. The performance had become second nature after 2 years of practice. Raymond, Ted nodded as he approached. You wanted to talk? Raymond studied Ted's face intently, searching for any sign of deception. Cut the act, Ted. I know what you're doing. I'm not sure what you mean. The watch. Raymond's voice was low but intense. A Patek Philippe Grandmaster chime doesn't just appear in someone's possession. There are only 7 of them in existence, and I know who owns every single one. Ted raised an eyebrow. You seem to know a lot about expensive watches for someone who should be focused on his business. Don't play games with me. I've been making calls, doing research. That watch was sold at auction 6 months ago to an anonymous buyer through a Swiss holding company. $68 million. $68 million? Ted whistled softly. That's quite an appreciation from $2 million. Raymond stepped closer, his voice dropping to a whisper. I know you're not who you pretend to be. The struggling ex-husband routine might fool Lucille and the kids, but I can smell money, Ted. I always have. Ted met his gaze steadily. And what exactly are you planning to do with this theory of yours? I want to know what your game is. Are you planning to take Lucille for more money? Is this some kind of elaborate fraud to increase your alimony? Because I'll fight you every step of the way. My game. Ted smiled, but there was no warmth in it. My game is very simple, Raymond. I'm a man who lost everything that mattered to him, and now I'm figuring out what comes next. Bullshit. Nobody drops $68 million on a watch if they're actually broke. Ted was quiet for a moment, watching a group of children play on the nearby playground. When he spoke again, his voice had lost all pretense of weakness. You're right about one thing, Raymond. I'm not who I pretend to be, but you're wrong about my motivations. Ted turned to face him directly. I don't want more money from Lucille. I want to watch your world burn. The mask had finally dropped, and Raymond took an involuntary step backward at the coldness in Ted's eyes. For 2 years, I've listened to people pity me. My own children think I'm a failure. My ex-wife parades you around as proof that she deserved better than what I could provide. Everyone believes I'm just another middle-aged loser who couldn't keep his family together. Ted, listen. No, you listen. Ted's voice remained calm, but the intensity behind it was unmistakable. I know about the safety violations at your construction sites. I know about the bribes you've paid to city inspectors. I know about the substandard materials you've been using to maximize profits. Most importantly, I know about the financial house of cards you've built your empire on. Raymond's face had gone pale. You can't prove any of that. Can I? Ted pulled out his phone and showed Raymond a photograph. It showed Raymond himself shaking hands with a city inspector while an envelope changed hands between them. This was taken outside the municipal building last month. The inspector's name is Eric Sullivan, and he's been taking monthly payments from you for 3 years to overlook code violations. That could be anything. A handshake, a friendly greeting. Ted swiped to the next image. It showed Eric Sullivan opening the envelope and counting the bills inside. $5,000. Cash. The same amount you've been paying him every month to approve inspections on buildings that should never have passed safety requirements. Raymond's hands were shaking now. What do you want? I want you to understand something very important, Ted said, pocketing his phone. When you decided to destroy my marriage, you thought you were taking everything from a weak man who couldn't fight back. You thought wrong. Look, Ted, what happened between Lucille and me started 3 years before our divorce was finalized. I know about every hotel room, every late-night phone call, every time you laughed about my supposed inadequacies. Ted's voice remained level, but his words cut like ice. I know about the plans you made to minimize my settlement, the way you coached Lucille on hiding assets, the private investigator you hired to dig up dirt on me that didn't exist. Raymond was backing away now, but Ted followed him step for step. You see, Raymond, you made one critical error. You assumed that because I appeared weak, I actually was weak. You confused strategic positioning with genuine vulnerability. And now you're about to learn the difference. I can make this right, Raymond said desperately. Whatever you want, money, an apology to the kids, a public admission. What I want is justice. Not the legal kind, not the fair and balanced kind. The kind where the people who destroy others face real consequences for their actions. Ted pulled out a business card and handed it to Raymond. It was for a construction safety attorney named Brendan Guthrie. Mr. Guthrie will be receiving a very detailed package tomorrow morning. Construction photographs, internal company communications, financial records, recorded conversations with city officials. Everything he needs to file the most comprehensive construction fraud case this city has ever seen. Raymond stared at the card in horror. You can't do this. It would destroy everything I've built. Yes, it would. Your company, your reputation, your financial assets, all of it. Just like you destroyed my family. The kids will hate you if they find out you orchestrated this. Ted's expression didn't change. My children already hate me, Raymond. You and Lucille made sure of that. At least this way, they'll eventually understand that their father wasn't the weak man they thought he was. Raymond crumpled the business card in his fist. I won't go down without a fight. I have resources, connections, people who owe me favors. I'm counting on it, Ted replied. I want you to use every resource you have, call in every favor, spend every dollar you can access. Because when you still lose, and you will lose, I want you to understand exactly how thoroughly you've been outmaneuvered. As Ted turned to walk away, Raymond grabbed his arm. Wait, there has to be another way. What if I leave Lucille? What if I disappear from your family's life completely? Ted looked down at Raymond's hand on his arm, then back up at his face. You're 3 years too late for that conversation. He pulled his arm free and started walking toward the park exit. Behind him, he could hear Raymond's voice rising in desperation. This isn't over, Ted. You think you're the only one who can play dirty? I'll expose you to everyone. Your kids, the courts, the IRS. I'll make sure the whole world knows you're a fraud. Ted stopped and turned back one final time. Go ahead, Raymond. Tell everyone that the weak, broken man you've been mocking for 2 years is actually wealthy enough to buy and sell you 10 times over. Tell them how badly you misjudged the situation. Tell them how you got outplayed by someone you thought was beneath you. As Ted walked away, he could see Raymond fumbling for his phone, probably calling his lawyers or his private investigators. It didn't matter. Every move Raymond made from this point forward would only accelerate his downfall. Phase 3 was about to begin, and Ted Graham was done pretending to be anything other than what he truly was, a man with unlimited resources, infinite patience, and absolutely nothing left to lose. Chapter 5. The Unraveling. The law offices of Guthrie and Associates occupied 3 floors of a glass tower in the financial district. Brendan Guthrie was a former federal prosecutor who had built his reputation on taking down corrupt developers and construction companies. When the package arrived at his office the morning after Ted's confrontation with Raymond, Guthrie knew he was looking at the case of a lifetime. Ted watched the news coverage from his penthouse apartment, sipping coffee as reporters gathered outside Newman Development headquarters. The story had broken exactly as he'd planned. Anonymous whistleblower reveals massive construction fraud. Safety violations endanger hundreds of residents. City officials under investigation for bribery. His phone rang. The caller ID showed Monica's number. Dad, are you seeing this? His daughter's voice was excited, almost breathless. That guy Mom married, he's all over the news. They're saying he's been bribing inspectors and using dangerous materials in his buildings. I saw something about it, Ted replied carefully. Must be difficult for your mother. She's devastated. She had no idea about any of this. Raymond's been lying to all of us. Monica paused. Dad, I owe you an apology. Ted's heart clenched. For what? For believing the worst about you. For thinking you were just bitter about the divorce. Mom always said you were jealous of Raymond's success. But maybe you saw something the rest of us didn't. Monica, your mother was trying to protect you. She didn't know any more than the rest of us. But you never said anything bad about Raymond, even when we were defending him. Even when Stephen called you a deadbeat. You just took it. Monica's voice was thick with guilt. You're a better man than I gave you credit for. Ted closed his eyes. His daughter's praise felt like a knife twisting in his chest. If she only knew the truth, that he had orchestrated every aspect of Raymond's downfall, that the anonymous whistleblower was Frank Wells acting on evidence Ted had provided, that the entire investigation was the result of Ted's carefully planned revenge. I should come see you, Monica continued. You shouldn't be alone right now, especially with money being so tight. I'm managing okay, Ted said softly. Dad, please, let me help. I know you're proud, but family should stick together. Maybe this whole thing with Raymond will help Mom see that she made a mistake. After ending the call, Ted stood at his window overlooking the city. For blocks away, he could see the Newman Development building where reporters were still gathered. By now, Raymond would be meeting with his crisis management team, trying to figure out how to contain the damage. What he didn't know was that Ted had 3 more devastating revelations scheduled to drop over the next week. Ted's phone buzzed with a text from Bob Briggs. Newman's attorney called an emergency meeting with all the resort investors. He's trying to keep them from pulling funding. But the environmental groups are planning a major protest tomorrow. Also, Eric Sullivan, the inspector, just lawyered up and is talking about a plea deal. Everything was proceeding exactly as Ted had planned. The beauty of his strategy was that every piece of evidence was genuine. Raymond had actually committed every crime he was being accused of. Ted had simply ensured that the evidence came to light in the most damaging way possible. The next call came from Lucille. Ted, I need to ask you something. Her voice was shaky, all traces of her usual superiority gone. Did you know about Raymond? Before the divorce, I mean. Did you know what kind of man he was? Ted considered his words carefully. I knew he was the kind of man who would sleep with another man's wife. That told me everything I needed to know about his character. I'm so sorry, Lucille whispered. For everything. For the affair, for the things I said about you, for turning the kids against you. I thought Raymond was successful and stable, but it was all built on lies. Lucille, no, let me finish. I know I don't deserve your forgiveness, but I need you to know that I was wrong. About you, about us, about what I thought I wanted. She was crying now. Raymond's lawyers are saying he might go to prison. The house is mortgaged to pay for his legal defense. I'm going to lose everything. Ted felt no satisfaction in her tears. The revenge he'd sought wasn't about Lucille's suffering. It was about justice. About ensuring that the people who had betrayed him faced consequences for their actions. What will you do? He asked. I don't know. Go back to work, I suppose. Try to rebuild. The kids are talking about moving back in with me to help with expenses. She laughed bitterly. Ironic, isn't it? After all these years of them thinking you were the failure, now they're having to take care of their mother. They love you, Lucille. Whatever mistakes you've made, they love you. Do you hate me, Ted? For what I did to our family? Ted was quiet for a long moment. No, I don't hate you. But I don't forgive you either. I understand. Her voice was barely audible. I deserve that. After the call ended, Ted opened his laptop and began typing an email to his attorney. It was time for phase 4 of his plan, the revelation of his true financial status. Tomorrow, he would begin the process of legitimately reclaiming his public identity as a successful businessman. The scared, broken ex-husband act had served its purpose. But first, he had one more phone call to make. Frank Wells answered on the second ring. Ted, have you been watching the news? I have. Congratulations, Frank. You did the right thing. I'm still processing it all. When that lawyer called and said he wanted to meet, I almost hung up on him. But when I saw all that evidence you collected, I knew I had to act. You're going to be the star witness in the biggest construction fraud case this city has ever seen. That takes courage. Courage? I'm terrified. Newman's people have been calling, offering money, making threats. My lawyer says I need police protection. You'll be fine, Frank. The FBI is involved now, and they take witness intimidation very seriously. I keep thinking about all those families living in buildings with substandard materials. What if there's an earthquake? What if there's a fire and the safety systems fail? Frank's voice was heavy with the weight of responsibility. I should have spoken up years ago. You're speaking up now. That's what matters. After ending the call, Ted poured himself another glass of Macallan and returned to the window. The city lights stretched out before him like a constellation of lives and dreams. Somewhere out there, Raymond Newman was discovering what it felt like to watch his world collapse in real time. Somewhere else, Lucille was confronting the reality of her choices. And in various apartments and houses throughout the city, his children were reassessing everything they thought they knew about their father. Ted had one. Raymond would face criminal charges, financial ruin, and public humiliation. Lucille would spend years rebuilding a life based on honest work rather than manipulated relationships. The corrupt city officials would be exposed and prosecuted. But victory felt different than Ted had expected. Colder. More hollow. His phone buzzed with another text. This one from Stephen. Dad, I saw the news about Raymond. I owe you an apology. Can we talk? Ted stared at the message for a long time before responding. Come by tomorrow evening. We have a lot to discuss. The final phase of his plan was about to begin. His children deserved to know the truth about who their father really was. All of it, including the parts that would horrify them. Chapter 6, The Truth Unveiled. Stephen Graham stood outside his father's apartment building in Riverside Heights, his hands stuffed deep in his jacket pockets against the October chill. At 20 years old, he had inherited his father's lean build and analytical mind, but the past 2 years had hardened his features with premature cynicism. He'd come here to apologize, but admitting he'd been wrong about his father felt like swallowing glass. Ted opened the door wearing the same worn clothes and weary expression Stephen had grown accustomed to seeing. The modest apartment looked exactly as Stephen expected. Second-hand furniture, a small television, the trappings of a man barely getting by. Thanks for coming, Ted said, stepping aside to let him in. Monica said I should talk to you. About Raymond, about everything. Stephen couldn't quite meet his father's eyes. I guess I owe you an apology. Sit down, Stephen. We need to have a conversation. They settled into the small living room, an uncomfortable silence stretching between them. Stephen had rehearsed this moment during the bus ride over, but now that he was here, the words felt inadequate. I was wrong about you, Stephen finally said. About calling you a deadbeat, about saying Raymond was more of a man than you were. I thought you were just bitter and jealous, but you saw what he really was when the rest of us were blind. Ted studied his son's face. What do you think you were wrong about, exactly? About thinking you were weak. About believing Mom when she said you couldn't provide for our family properly. Stephen's voice grew stronger as he continued. You never fought back when we criticized you. You never defended yourself. I thought that made you pathetic, but maybe it just made you dignified. And what if I told you that everything you believed about me was a carefully constructed lie? Stephen frowned. What do you mean? Ted stood up and walked to the window. Stephen, I need you to understand something. The man you've been visiting for the past 2 years, the struggling ex-husband living in a studio apartment, that person doesn't exist. Dad, I don't understand. The apartment we're sitting in is rented under a false name. I've never spent a single night here. I maintain it purely for appearances. Ted turned back to face his son, just like I've maintained everything else about this identity. Stephen's confusion was giving way to something approaching alarm. What are you talking about? Ted walked to a bookshelf and removed what appeared to be a worn paperback novel. He opened it to reveal a hidden compartment containing a key card and a set of car keys. My real home is a penthouse apartment 20 minutes from here. I own it outright, along with several others. The consulting business your mother thought she took in the divorce? I sold it for $47 million before we ever filed papers. Stephen stared at him in shock. That's impossible. I've been worth north of $50 million since before your mother's affair began. The struggling to find work routine, the riding the bus, the modest lifestyle, all of it was performance art designed to make everyone believe I had lost everything in the divorce. But why? Why would you pretend to be poor? Ted's expression grew cold. Because I wanted Raymond and your mother to feel secure in their victory before I destroyed them. The words hung in the air like a physical presence. Stephen felt his worldview cracking apart as the implications sank in. The evidence against Raymond, Stephen whispered. The whistleblower report, the safety violations. All real, all documented through surveillance and investigation that I funded. Raymond Newman is a criminal, and he's going to prison because I made sure his crimes came to light. Stephen shot to his feet. You orchestrated all of this. The investigation, the arrests, the destruction of his company. Every piece of it. But Mom, she's lost everything. The house, her security, her reputation. She made her choices, Stephen. She chose to have an affair. She chose to turn you and Monica against me. She chose to build her new life on the foundation of someone else's criminal enterprise. Stephen was backing toward the door now, his face pale with horror. What kind of man does something like this? What kind of father ruins his children's lives for revenge? The kind who doesn't forgive betrayal. Ted's voice remained perfectly calm. The kind who understands that actions have consequences. We're your children. You stopped being my children the moment you chose her side over mine. The moment you called me a deadbeat and moved in with the man who destroyed our family. Stephen's hand was on the doorknob now. This is insane. You're insane. I'm methodical. There's a difference. I have to tell Monica. I have to tell Mom. Go ahead, Ted said with a slight smile. Tell them that the weak, pathetic ex-husband they've been pitying is actually wealthy enough to buy and sell their new family 10 times over. Tell them that every move they've made for the past 2 years has been exactly what I wanted them to make. Stephen opened the door, then stopped. Why are you telling me this? Why reveal everything now? Because Raymond's destruction is complete, and I want you all to understand exactly how thoroughly you misjudged me. I want you to spend the rest of your lives knowing that when you had the chance to stand by your father, you chose his enemies instead. We didn't know. You didn't want to know. You found it easier to believe I was a failure than to question your mother's version of events. Stephen stood in the doorway for a moment longer, looking at his father as if seeing him for the first time. I don't know who you are. I'm the same man I've always been, Stephen. You just never bothered to look beneath the surface. After Stephen left, Ted returned to his window. His phone was already ringing, probably Stephen calling Monica, starting the chain reaction that would spread the truth through his family like wildfire. By tomorrow, everyone would know that Ted Graham wasn't the man they thought he was. His revenge was complete, but it had come at a price he was only now beginning to understand. He had won the war, but he had sacrificed any hope of reconciliation with his children in the process. They would never forgive him for the deception, for the manipulation, for the cold calculation that had destroyed their stepfather and left their mother financially ruined. Ted raised his glass of Macallan in a silent toast to his empty apartment. He had become exactly what he'd always been accused of being, a man alone, surrounded by the ruins of relationships that could never be rebuilt. The difference was that now he no longer cared. Chapter 7, The Reckoning. The emergency family meeting was called for Sunday evening at Monica's apartment. She lived in a converted warehouse in the Arts District, the kind of trendy space that young professionals with good jobs could afford. As Ted approached the building, he could see the warm light from her windows and the silhouettes of people moving around inside. He had decided to attend as himself for the first time in 2 years. The custom-tailored suit was charcoal gray, understated but unmistakably expensive. The shoes were Italian leather. The watch, a different Patek Philippe, slightly less ostentatious than the Grandmaster chime, caught the light as he pressed the buzzer. When Monica's voice came through the intercom, she didn't recognize the man standing at her door. "I'm sorry. I think you have the wrong apartment," she said. "It's me, Monica. It's your father." The long pause that followed told Ted everything he needed to know about Stephen's phone calls. The door buzzed open. Monica was waiting in the hallway when the elevator opened, her face a mixture of confusion and something approaching fear. Ted had always been proud of his eldest daughter. She had inherited her mother's artistic sensibilities, but tempered them with practical intelligence. She worked as a graphic designer for a nonprofit and had built a life based on genuine accomplishment rather than manipulation. "Dad," she whispered. "Hello, Monica." She stared at him for a long moment, taking in the expensive clothes, the confident posture, the subtle but unmistakable signs of wealth. "Stephen said, he told me things, but I didn't believe that your father isn't who you thought he was." "It's true." Monica stepped aside to let him into the apartment. Lucille was sitting on the couch, her face streaked with tears. She looked older than her 52 years, worn down by the stress of Raymond's arrest and the financial collapse that had followed. Stephen stood by the windows, his arms crossed, anger radiating from every line of his body. "Well," Lucille said, her voice hoarse, "I guess the family reunion is complete." Ted surveyed the room. His ex-wife and children gathered together in crisis, united in their shared sense of betrayal. It was almost poetic. "Stephen told us," Monica said, closing the door behind him, "about the money, about the apartment, about everything." "Not everything," Ted corrected. "Just the parts he could understand." "Explain it to us then," Monica demanded. "Explain how the father we thought we knew could systematically destroy people's lives for revenge." Ted moved to the center of the room, his presence somehow making the space feel smaller. "What would you like to know?" "How I discovered your mother's affair 3 years before she filed for divorce. How I listened to recordings of her and Raymond laughing about my supposed inadequacies. How I watched you both choose his side without ever asking for my version of events." "We were protecting Mom," Stephen said defensively. "From what?" "From the consequences of her own choices." Lucille looked up at him, her eyes red-rimmed. "Ted, please. I know I hurt you, but what you've done to Raymond, to our family, this isn't justice. This is cruelty. Justice would have been you being honest about your affair instead of making me look like a fool for 3 years. Justice would have been my children asking questions instead of automatically believing I was the villain." Ted's voice remained calm, but the words cut like razors. "What you got was consequences." Monica stepped between them. "Dad, Raymond's going to prison. Mom's lost her home. The kids at my school are talking about their parents being afraid their apartments aren't safe because of the buildings Raymond constructed. You've hurt innocent people. I exposed a criminal who was endangering lives for profit. Those buildings would have collapsed eventually. Earthquake, fire, structural failure. I potentially save hundreds of people from injury or death by manipulating and destroying our family. Your family was destroyed the moment your mother decided to have an affair. Everything that's happened since then has just been the logical progression of choices that were made without my input." Stephen moved away from the window, his fists clenched. "You're a sociopath. Normal people don't plan elaborate revenge schemes that take years to execute. Normal people don't have their wives cheat on them with criminals while their children call them failures." Ted's composure finally cracked slightly, a flash of genuine anger breaking through. "Normal people don't spend 2 years listening to their own family pity them while secretly knowing they could buy everyone's problems away with pocket change." "Then why didn't you?" Monica asked, tears starting to flow. "If you really loved us, why didn't you just fix everything? Why didn't you help us?" "Because you never asked for my help. You asked for my compliance, my acceptance of your version of events, my quiet disappearance from your lives. You got exactly what you asked for." Lucille stood up slowly, her movements shaky. "I'm calling the police. What you've done, the surveillance, the manipulation, the destruction of evidence, some of it has to be illegal." Ted smiled coldly. "Go ahead. Explain to them how your ex-husband gathered evidence of actual crimes and turned it over to the proper authorities. Explain how he used his own money to fund legitimate investigations. Explain how every piece of evidence against Raymond Newman was collected legally and presented through appropriate channels. You've been watching us for 2 years. I've been protecting myself from a woman who had already demonstrated her willingness to lie and manipulate for personal gain. Given your history, surveillance seemed prudent. Monica collapsed into a chair, her head in her hands. I don't understand how you became this person. The father I remember was kind and gentle. He would never hurt people like this. The father you remember was weak, Ted replied. He believed that love and trust and good intentions were enough to hold a family together. He learned otherwise. So you decided to become a monster instead? I decided to become someone who couldn't be betrayed again. The room fell silent except for the sound of Lucille's quiet crying. Outside, the city continued its rhythm, unaware of the family destroying itself 20 stories above the streets. Finally, Stephen spoke. What do you want from us now? Why reveal everything? Why not just disappear and let us rebuild our lives? Ted considered the question seriously. Because I wanted you to understand the cost of your choices. I wanted you to know that when you had the opportunity to stand by your father, you chose his enemies instead. I wanted you to spend the rest of your lives knowing exactly how wrong you were about everything. And now that we know, Monica asked, now you live with it, just like I've lived with your betrayal. Ted turned toward the door, then stopped. For what it's worth, I never wanted it to end this way. I gave all of you multiple opportunities to question the narrative you'd been fed, to ask for my side of the story, to wonder if maybe the man you'd known for decades might not have suddenly become the failure you were told he was. We were children trying to understand our parents' divorce, Monica said desperately. You were adults who chose the easier story over the complicated truth. As Ted reached for the door handle, Lucille called out one final time. Ted, wait. Is there any part of you that can forgive us? Any chance for our family to find a way forward? Ted paused with his hand on the door. No, Lucille, there isn't. Some things can't be forgiven. Some betrayals are permanent. He opened the door and stepped into the hallway, leaving behind the broken remains of a family that had never really understood him at all. The elevator ride down felt like a descent into freedom. Chapter 8. The Price of Victory. 6 months after the revelation, Ted stood in the federal courthouse watching Raymond Newman receive his sentence. 15 years for construction fraud, bribery, and conspiracy. The judge had been particularly harsh, noting that Raymond's crimes had put hundreds of families at risk and undermined public trust in construction safety standards. Raymond looked smaller than Ted remembered. The expensive suits and confident demeanor had been replaced by an orange jumpsuit and the hollow stare of a man who had lost everything. When their eyes met across the courtroom, Raymond mouthed a single word, "Why?" Ted didn't respond. The question itself revealed how little Raymond understood about consequences. Frank Wells sat in the gallery, his role as the key whistleblower having transformed him from an unemployed construction worker into a federal witness with a new identity and a substantial reward from the government's whistleblower program. He nodded to Ted as they filed out of the courtroom, a gesture of acknowledgement between two men who had brought justice to a corrupt system. Outside the courthouse, reporters waited with their cameras and microphones. Ted walked past them without comment, but he could hear the questions being shouted. Mr. Newman, do you have anything to say to the families affected by your husband's crimes? The question was directed at Lucille, who had attended the sentencing despite their divorce. Ted didn't turn around to see her response. His phone buzzed with a text from Bob Briggs. Newman's assets have been fully liquidated for victim compensation. The civil suits are settled. Your involvement remains completely sealed in all court documents. The legal victories were complete, but Ted found little satisfaction in them. Raymond was going to prison, the corrupt city officials had been prosecuted, and the construction company had been dissolved with its assets used to compensate the families living in unsafe buildings. Justice had been served by any objective measure, but the personal cost had been higher than Ted had anticipated. Monica had moved to Portland 3 months ago, taking a job with an environmental nonprofit. She'd sent him a letter explaining that she needed distance from everything that had happened, space to figure out who she was in relation to a father she felt she'd never really known. The letter was polite but final. She wasn't cutting contact completely, but she wasn't ready for a relationship either. Stephen had been more direct. He'd sent a single text message. I understand why you did what you did, but I can't forgive how you did it. Don't contact me again. Lucille had moved back to her sister's house in Ohio, where she was slowly rebuilding her life as a freelance interior designer. She'd sent Ted one final message through their mutual attorney, an offer to return the money from their divorce settlement. Ted had declined. She had earned that money through 15 years of marriage, and her betrayal didn't erase that fact. The isolation had become Ted's new normal. He'd stopped maintaining the facade of poverty, moving openly into his penthouse apartment and resuming his role as a legitimate businessman. But the relationships that might have given meaning to his success were gone, severed by choices that couldn't be undone. Ted's penthouse office overlooked the harbor, its floor-to-ceiling windows offering a view that cost more per month than most people's annual salaries. He spent his days managing investments, developing new technologies, and building a business empire that would outlast him by decades. But the work felt mechanical now, a way to occupy time rather than a source of purpose. The intercom buzzed. "Mr. Graham, there's a young woman here to see you. She says she's your daughter." Ted's heart jumped. "Send her up." But when the elevator doors opened, it wasn't Monica or even someone he recognized. The woman was in her early 20s, with dark hair and intelligent eyes that reminded him of someone he couldn't quite place. "Mr. Graham? I'm Sarah Newman, Raymond's daughter from his first marriage." Ted studied her face, seeing traces of Raymond's features softened by youth and what appeared to be genuine integrity. "What can I do for you, Sarah? I wanted to thank you." The words were so unexpected that Ted nearly laughed. "Thank me for stopping my father before he hurt more people. I've known about his business practices for years, but I was too afraid to speak up. I was financially dependent on him, and I told myself that maybe I was wrong, maybe the safety violations weren't as bad as they seemed." Sarah moved into the office, her posture straight, but her hands betraying nervous energy. "When the news broke about the investigation, I felt guilty and relieved at the same time. Guilty because I should have acted sooner, relieved because someone finally had the courage to do what I couldn't. You were his daughter. The situation was more complicated for you. Was it, or was I just protecting my own comfort?" Sarah shook her head. "I've been reading about the case, about the families who were living in unsafe buildings. Some of them have children. What if there had been an earthquake? What if one of those buildings had collapsed?" Ted gestured for her to sit down. "What will you do now?" "I'm finishing my degree in structural engineering. I want to make sure buildings are constructed safely, properly. I want to be part of the solution instead of part of the problem." "That's admirable." Sarah was quiet for a moment, then looked directly at him. "I also wanted to apologize for what my father did to your family. The affair, the manipulation, the way he turned your children against you. I know about all of it. You're not responsible for your father's actions. Maybe not, but I benefited from them. The money he spent on my education, the apartment he helped me afford, the internships he arranged through his business connections. All of it was built on illegal activities and the destruction of your marriage." Ted studied her face, seeing none of Raymond's calculating coldness. "What do you expect me to do with your apology?" "Nothing. I just needed to say it." Sarah stood up to leave, then paused. "For what it's worth, I think you're a good man who was pushed too far by people who underestimated you. But I also think you've paid a price for your revenge that might be higher than what you gained." After she left, Ted returned to his window, overlooking the harbor. Sarah Newman's words echoed in his mind. A price higher than what you gained. It was an assessment that Ted had been avoiding, but it felt undeniably true. He had destroyed Raymond Newman completely. He had exposed corruption and potentially saved lives. He had proven that underestimating him was a mistake that carried serious consequences. But he had also lost his children, possibly forever. He had spent 2 years living a lie, becoming someone he didn't recognize. He had chosen revenge over reconciliation, justice over mercy, victory over healing. The city lights began to twinkle in the gathering dusk, each one representing a life, a family, a story of connection and love and loss. Ted Graham stood alone among them all, wealthy beyond measure and poorer than he had ever been. Chapter 9. The Final Move. 2 years later, Ted Graham sat in his private office reviewing the latest quarterly reports from Graham Industries, the technology conglomerate he'd built from the shell companies that had hidden his wealth during the divorce. The business had grown exponentially, developing innovative solutions for everything from cybersecurity to sustainable construction materials. The irony wasn't lost on him that his company was now leading the industry in the same construction safety protocols that had been used to destroy Raymond Newman. A knock on his office door interrupted his thoughts. His assistant entered with a familiar expression of confusion. "Mr. Graham, there's a gentleman here to see you. He says he's your son, but—" She trailed off, clearly uncertain. Stephen Graham had changed significantly in the 2 years since their last encounter. The angry young man had been replaced by someone older, more serious, with the kind of weathered confidence that came from hard experience. He wore a simple but well-tailored suit and carried himself with a dignity that reminded Ted of his own father. "Stephen, Dad." They stood looking at each other across the office, two men separated by more than just physical distance. Finally, Stephen moved closer, his eyes taking in the office's understated luxury, the view of the harbor, the subtle displays of wealth and power. "I've been following your company," Stephen said. "Graham Industries. The construction safety innovations, the whistleblower protection programs you've funded, the scholarships for children of families affected by unsafe buildings. Good investments," Ted replied carefully. "Are they? Or are they your attempt at atonement?" Ted gestured for Stephen to sit down, but his son remained standing. "I came here to tell you something," Stephen continued. "About Monica, about Mom, about what's happened to our family since everything came out. I'm listening. Monica's doing well in Portland. She's built a good life for herself, but she thinks about you every day. She keeps articles about Graham Industries in a folder on her desk. She's proud of what you've accomplished, but she's afraid to reach out because she doesn't know if you'd want to hear from her." Ted felt something crack inside his chest. "And your mother?" "Mom's remarried. A high school principal in Ohio. Good man, honest work, nothing like Raymond. She's happy, or as happy as someone could be after what she's been through." Stephen paused. "She talks about you sometimes. About the man she fell in love with before everything went wrong." "Stephen, why are you here?" "Because I figured something out about you, Dad. Something it took me 2 years to understand." Stephen moved to the window, looking out at the harbor where cargo ships moved slowly toward the horizon. "You destroyed Raymond Newman because he was a criminal who was endangering lives. But you destroyed our family because we hurt you and you wanted us to understand what that felt like. That's one way to look at it. Is it accurate?" Ted considered the question seriously. "It's part of the truth. What's the other part?" "The other part is that I became so focused on being strong that I forgot how to be vulnerable. I became so determined never to be betrayed again that I made betrayal inevitable." Stephen turned back to face him. "Dad, I need to ask you something, and I need you to be completely honest. If you could go back and do things differently, knowing what you know now about the cost, would you?" Ted had asked himself the same question hundreds of times over the past 2 years. The answer had evolved as he'd watched his business grow, as he'd seen the impact of his construction safety initiatives, as he'd felt the weight of his isolation. "I would still have exposed Raymond's crimes," Ted said finally. "People's lives were at stake, and he needed to be stopped. But I would have done it differently. I would have tried to separate justice from revenge. And us, your family, I would have trusted you with the truth from the beginning. I would have fought for you instead of writing you off." Ted's voice grew quieter. "I would have remembered that love requires forgiveness, and forgiveness requires strength, not weakness." Stephen was silent for a long moment. "Monica wants to see you. So does Mom, believe it or not. We've all spent the past 2 years trying to understand what happened to our family, and we've come to some conclusions. Such as that you were right about Raymond, that Mom made terrible choices that hurt everyone, that we were unfair to you during the divorce." Stephen paused, "but also that your response was disproportionate to the crime. That revenge isn't the same as justice. That destroying people, even people who've wronged you, doesn't actually heal anything." Ted nodded slowly. "All fair assessments. There's something else." Stephen reached into his jacket and pulled out an envelope. "Mom wanted me to give you this." Ted opened the envelope carefully. Inside was a single photograph, their family at Christmas 15 years ago. Monica and Stephen were still children, their faces bright with excitement. Lucille was laughing at something Ted had said. Ted himself looked genuinely happy, his arm around his wife, his children close by. On the back, Lucille had written a single line. This was real, too. Ted stared at the photograph for a long time, remembering the man he'd been before betrayal had hardened him into someone else. That man had been capable of forgiveness, of second chances, of believing in redemption. What would it take? Ted asked quietly. For what? For our family to find a way forward. Not back to what we were. That's impossible. But forward to something new. Stephen sat down for the first time since entering the office. It would take time. It would take forgiveness from all of us, including you. It would take accepting that we're all different people now, and figuring out if we can love who we've become. And if we can't, then at least we'll know we tried. At least we'll know that we chose healing over anger, connection over isolation. Ted looked out at the harbor, where the sun was beginning to set over the water. Somewhere in Portland, Monica was finishing her workday, probably thinking about the father she'd lost to his own need for revenge. Somewhere in Ohio, Lucille was making dinner for a man who loved her without conditions or expectations of perfection. And here in his office, his son was offering him something he'd thought was lost forever, a chance to be a father again. There's one more thing, Stephen said. Something I need you to know before you decide. What's that? I forgive you, Dad. For the lies, for the manipulation, for choosing revenge over family. I understand why you did it, and I forgive you for it. The words hit Ted like a physical blow. In all his planning, all his strategies for victory and vindication, he'd never considered the possibility that forgiveness might be offered freely, without conditions or surrender. What? Ted asked, his voice barely audible. Because you're my father. Because love doesn't end just because people make terrible choices. Because forgiveness isn't about whether someone deserves it. It's about whether you're strong enough to offer it. Ted Graham, brilliant strategist, successful businessman, architect of perfect revenge, sat in his expensive office and wept for the first time in 4 years. What happens now? He asked when he could speak again. Now we see if the man who built all this, Stephen gestured around the office, still remembers how to be the man from that photograph. Ted looked at the picture again, his family as they'd been, before betrayal and revenge had torn them apart. It was a different kind of victory than he'd originally sought,